Hello. In this video, I'm going to talk about the Get Ed In Your Head campaign created by students at the University of Dundee and how it can be used to spread awareness of exercise deficit disorder in children to healthcare professionals. Ed is your average 12-year-old kid. He lives in Dundee with his family and he's just started secondary school. He's not used to being a small fish in a big pond. His favourite subjects are geography and computing, and he's getting on really well at school so far. Whenever Ed gets a spare moment, he'll be watching football, whether on TV or online. I'm now going to talk to you about the average day of Ed. In the morning, he wakes up early and he gets the bus to school. It arrives right outside his door, so that means he gets a wee bit of an extra lie-in. At school, during break and lunch, he likes to play football with his friends, but quite often he isn't playing because he's still finishing off his lunch and he's a bit rushed. Luckily for Ed, he goes to a really active school where they do PE 3 times a week for 45 minutes, which is actually more than the recommended 2 hours a week. There they play basketball, tennis, football, rugby and all sorts of sports. Like every other kid, Ed has to come home from school and do loads of homework. Probably spends an hour doing this. He then has his dinner with his family and then he plays online for about 4 hours playing Xbox and the PlayStation. Because of this, he really struggles to get to sleep early and he ends up just browsing on YouTube for a few hours before he goes to sleep as well. So that's probably an average of 5 hours screen time after dinner. According to the government document, Start Active, Stay Active, all children and young people between the ages of 5 and 18 should engage in moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity for at least 60 minutes and up to several hours every day. An example of moderate activity would be brisk walking. An example of vigorous intensity physical activity would be competitive sport. As well as this, vigorous intensity activities, including those that strengthen muscle and bone, should be incorporated at least 3 days a week. And all children and young people should minimise the amount of time spent being sedentary, for example sitting for long extended periods of time. According to the 2017 Scottish Health Survey, only 33% of children aged 5 to 15 were actually meeting the recommended guidelines for physical activity. And this goes to say the same for Ed, who although was doing 45 of PE 3 times a week, was unfortunately not reaching the physical activity guidelines. The survey also showed that with an increase in age, there's also a very large decline in the physical activity levels of children. There was also evidence to show that girls have a drastically decreased rate of physical activity levels compared to boys as they grow older. Shockingly, it was also shown that Scottish children spend 3.3 hours on weekdays, not including time spent at school, and 4.5 hours on weekends being sedentary. An example of this could just be watching TV or browsing the internet. This brings me on to the topic of exercise deficit disorder, which is described as reduced levels of moderate to vigorous physical activity that are inconsistent with public health recommendations. As a healthcare professional, I want you to remember that whenever anyone comes in with reduced signs of physical activity and an increase of sedentary time, to remember Ed. According to the World Health Organization, physical inactivity is responsible for 6% of global mortality and over 1 million deaths per year in Europe. Physical inactivity is also the principal cause of 21 to 25% of breast and colon cancers, 27% of type 2 diabetes, and 30% of coronary heart disease. Engaging in physical activity has been shown to have both short and long-term benefits for a child. The benefits include improving cardiorespiratory fitness, reduced rates of type 2 diabetes, better bone and muscle strength, and psychological benefits such as improving confidence and social skills. There's also a reduced risk of anxiety and depression in later life. And luckily for Ed, there's also evidence to suggest that it improves sleep too. It has also been suggested that children who are more physically active are more likely to pick up other healthy behaviours and habits to then continue through on into adulthood. So, how can we actively encourage more children to do physical activity? There's already a lot of interventions out there, such as in school we have the Walk to School scheme, Bike It, Daily Mile, and actively encouraging PE in schools. Parental influences should also be taken into account, as evidence has shown that the more active a mother is, the more active her children will be. We should also continue to build links between the community sports and the school, through programmes such as Sports Scotland's Active Schools. Although a lot of these interventions are cardio-based, it's also important to remember to include strength-based exercises as well in interventions, and I think this is somewhere that the Young Ambassador programme in schools could look into for the future. As a healthcare professional, you must be wondering, how can I help? And apart from spreading awareness of exercise deficit disorder, we only ask that you start the conversations with your patients today by asking the simple question, how much do you exercise each day? Anne Gates, a healthcare professional who now spreads awareness on the benefits of physical activity, once said, "A qualified doctor, nurse, midwife, or allied health professional may see 500,000 patients during their professional career. This has enormous potential for advocacy and the promotion of physical activity." So this is why we need you to spread awareness of the benefits of physical activity within your own community. Studies have shown that 25% of people would do more exercise if advised to by a GP, and 85% of them would do an exercise if prescribed a specific physical activity to do. 70% of patients said that they would exercise more if they knew their GP exercised, and there is a correlation between the physical activity level of a doctor and how often they bring up physical activity in consultations, which gives you even more reason to do physical activity yourself. In an English study concerning over 1,000 GPs, 54% of patients reported not being provided advice on physical activity by their GP. Only 20% of the doctors were familiar with the national guidelines, and 30% had never heard of them at all. More than 1 in 7 doctors said they were not confident with raising the issue of physical inactivity. Which is why, if you see any child like Ed with reduced physical activity levels or increased levels of sedentary time, think exercise deficit disorder. And get Ed in your head.